Welcome to Wisdom Exchange TV. My name is Suzanne F Stevens, Chief Edge Optimizer for the Ignite Excellence Group of Initiatives. One of our key initiatives is the Ignite Excellence Foundation, where we invest, inspire, and develop future leaders in emerging countries. With that goal in mind, we produce Wisdom Exchange TV, where we interview women trailblazers, leaders of many, all over Africa, who are pioneers in either politics, business, philanthropy, or education. Today, we're with a leading lady in business. We are with Tisha Greyling, Principal and Director of Golder Associates Africa. She was the leader of the Environmental and Social Division in 2005 and 2008, and I mention that because it will be very important for this interview. Tisha founded the first company in South Africa that focused on public participation and engagement of stakeholders. Tisha is an accredited trainer with the International Association for Public Participation. She has developed and received numerous guides on public participation, stakeholder engagement, presenting training and social impact management to a wide range of companies and organizations, has worked extensively with international bodies, and has directed social impact management programs for several large mining and oil and gas companies. Tisha has worked and trained in mining, oil and gas, energy, waste management, industrial forestry, chemical and paper manufacturing sectors in 25 countries. Tisha acts as project director, strategic advisor, reviewer and mentor for social environmental assessments and management on large international projects in various sectors. It is absolute pleasure to have this leading lady with us because we're going to learn a ton from you. I just know we are. So thank you so much for being here in Johannesburg. What was the catalyst to work with an organization like Golder?
Company that Golder is, which is an employee-owned company and where you actually are part of the ownership structure, was the first attraction. But secondly, throughout my career, I have realized that to make a difference in society, you need those three strong pillars of engineering, social and environmental science, and communication or engagement of people. And myself and a number of other firms clubbed together, and we came the Africa arm of Golder Associates to bring all those disciplines together, and as a result to make a difference, especially in Africa, in the projects in which we work.
Wonderful, and I never really looked at it like that before, with those key disciplines. Being a communication expert, not realizing that engineering, everything does come around that as well.
If you only have engineers, you only have one perspective.
Right.
If you only have the scientists, you have another one.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to bring all of that wisdom together to collectively make a difference.
Now, for many years of your career, you've focused on public participation, consultation, and awareness creation. Can you explain the importance of that focus?
It's part of making a difference. Worldwide, we know that when you bring the people into a project that you will be affecting as a result of that project, and you get their local knowledge, you understand upfront their fears, you understand how it is that they live their lives, you can plan upfront in a project to avoid or mitigate those impacts. My mother always said 2 heads are better than one, and I say to my clients that all these many stakeholders, sometimes it's activist NGOs or really emotional housewives or very afraid communities, all these stakeholders, when you actually bring all their views into a project, you have a lot of free consultants that help you design your mining project or your oil and gas project. And of course, when you bring in people, you create relationships. For mining and oil and gas and any other large development today, you need to have good relations with your neighbors and your stakeholders. And that is what we help our clients to do.
Can you give us an example, particularly in oil and gas, where you've had to go out and how people's viewpoints affected some of the decisions that you actually have made?
In South Africa, we worked on a 555 kilometer multi-fuels pipeline, meaning hazardous pipeline, from Durban on the coast to Johannesburg. And most of that pipeline had to go over private land because it is so built up between those two cities. When we accepted the commission from the client, we made it very clear that it is no use to give us a line on a map that an engineer has drawn and said, this is where the pipeline needs to go. We need to bring in the local knowledge and the wisdom of the people who will be affected, as well as the engineering information, because you would go to a local farmer and you'd say, a pipeline's got to go through here somewhere. For you, what would be the best place if it should cross your farm? And he would say, straight over that mountain. Now the engineer will tell you that is not possible. And on the other hand, the environmental people will say, well, you cannot take it through there because it's very sensitive wetland, for example. We started off with about 36 broad route alternatives, worked with the public, the landowners, the farmers, the engineers, the social specialists, the environmental specialists, worked in teams, and through ongoing dialogue with everybody, we found a route for that pipeline in 9 months, where people were actually saying, okay, I'm willing to live with it. So that entire pipeline route was in fact designed in a participatory process. In that specific project, because we had so many different route alternatives in the beginning, we in fact personally had contact, and mainly face-to-face, but also some by telephone and in meetings, with over 900 private landowners. It wasn't our job to get them to sign servitude agreements, but they signed the servitude agreement after we've met with them and assisted them in making their contribution about where the pipeline should go over their land. And in some cases there were in fact some advantages. I remember this one stakeholder saying they've just bought the farm, they'd like to have some horse trails. And when one builds a pipeline, you clear 30 meters space to dig the trench, but also for your working space for your vehicles. And she said, well, if you could make it there, I would have my horse trail exactly there where you are making it.
When you approach the community, is there a certain procedure that you need to go through? For example, do you need to start with a chief? Or is there a chief? Or do you go, what is the process that you take to engage those individuals?
Whether it's rural communities or say commercial farmers or so, there are always leaders. Leaders of farmers associations, leaders of NGOs, leaders of communities. And the protocol is often different. So you make very sure before you approach people what is the local protocol. Sometimes you have to go to the local university, or you ask somebody in the know, or what we normally do when we work in countries outside of South Africa where we are not familiar with the culture, we always team up with a local counterpart organization. And in the process we also help to build their capacity, but that they can pave the way for us culturally and through local languages, and make sure that we don't make a mistake. Cultures, for example, you should never touch a chief with your left hand, or if you give a present or a document, you cannot give it to the chief, you have to give it to the chief's advisor, and so on.
And it's excellent advice no matter what business you're in, is learning from the locals before approaching new business opportunities. What can other companies do to promote public participation?
It's very interesting. There's a good body of research coming out right now, including from respected institutions such as Harvard, where they are quantifying the value of stakeholder engagement. One of our mining clients in West Africa in 2006 had work stoppages, roadblocks, demonstrations, really bad press, and we assisted them to help to build good relations with the local community. It's just talk to people, just have a relation. The recent research shows that today they spend $1.6 million per annum less on security because they have good relations with their communities. So, as I say, public participation, if you view it in the right way, is actually getting a lot of free consultants to help you to design your project. And you, as a developer, big project, small project, you do not want to have 20 years or 30 years of grief with your neighbors. You need buy-in into the process. People will support the project if they've been part of the process. But we often find that, and I don't want to give the wrong impression here, but that promotional experts would go out and sell the benefits of the project without talking about the impacts and how they can be mitigated. So you need buy-in into the process, and from that will follow support for the project. If people are happy with the process and they see that their views have been taken into consideration.
Great advice. What is some of the key advice to consider when implementing a social program?
Make sure that that client has done or is going to do a social impact assessment. We'll be doing stakeholder engagement, providing information, getting people's inputs. There's often a resettlement program where people unfortunately have to move to make way for the mining or the oil and gas infrastructure. You also often have to do training of the construction contractors in social management. You need to have a community impacts avoidance plan to infrastructure and so on. So it's a whole suite of social management plans that need to be implemented. Now, in order to do so, you need to understand the international best practice standards in the world today, and those are the International Finance Corporation. They have performance standards, 8 of them, 6 of them, which focus on social management, and they guide you in having those social management plans. The second thing that is critical is that, especially on a large project with a fast schedule, you need to have senior social specialists, either social scientists or communicators or resettlement experts. You need to have senior people that can think on their feet. And those are the two key things. And then, of course, good social management costs money. Bad social management costs a lot more. Clients are often really surprised by the budget, that these things can cost so much, because you often need large teams of people to go out into the field, talk to communities, make presentations, and so on.
Without putting names to it, but can you give us an example of a badly executed social program and the consequences of that?
This manifests in all projects all over the world. Roadblocks, work stoppages. One of my clients in the Middle East, an oil and gas client, simply had people arriving with guns, shooting in front of the bulldozers, saying, "Stop the work. We want jobs." Sometimes people are so powerless in their own country because of inadequate laws, and with this really big, major company, they feel completely powerless, and they then resort to measures that are not acceptable to us. So that's their only voice. The guys that were shooting in front of the bulldozers, that was their only voice. So I'm not condoning it, but it is what happens when people feel powerless.
A social program that was implemented really well and had huge positive implications.
One in the Congo for a mining company in the mid-90s. The mining company did a social impact assessment, started supporting community development. Some of the people that were most against the company and most angry in the beginning ended up in their own businesses, The mining company got a trusted NGO to help people to establish their businesses, and every brick that was made for the mine camp, every piece of road, all the fencing, the window frames, the door frames, were in fact all made by people in their own businesses. And when that phase of the construction stopped, money had started circulating in the local villages, with people saying, well, I need a new section to my house, I need a fence, and so on and so forth. So there was sustainability. Now one has to, as we all know, in a relationship, one has to work on relationships. And it takes a second to break the trust, and then a long time to build it up again. So, but that was one very good example. Very hard work, but it paid off in the end.
Now you bring up sustainability, and that's such an important piece. Do you have some recommendations on how to make any social project sustainable?
Africa is full of abandoned schools and hospitals, put up by some big companies with very good intentions, but they leave and then there's no longer somebody to support that hospital. So the notion of sustainability, as it came out of the World Summit on Sustainable Development in 2002, is very much relies on partnerships. You're a mine, you're going to be there for 20 years. Whatever you do during construction and operation, you want to endure post-closure. So if you can partner with somebody that's going to be there much longer than you and have the local expertise, and that is often an NGO, a church, a university, or as we see now, models coming out where companies actually establish a separate company with directors and a secretariat and so on to run those community development projects so that they endure post-closure.
This is something close to my heart too, is seeing so many people come, providing services where somebody can't fix it. They don't have the know-how or the education to fix it, so it just stays there for years to come.
Therefore, a hand pump for a borehole is often much better than some mechanical piece of equipment that when it breaks down, nobody can fix it. I just want to say another thing which is important in terms of sustainability, or social projects being sustainable. We cannot or should not decide what the project should be. The community themselves, the stakeholders themselves, including the government stakeholders, should help decide what is it that's needed there. We see many well-meaning, including water pipelines to dry areas, being vandalized because people say, and I mean it sounds crazy, but people say, you never even asked us. There's a very good publication in Australia by an Aboriginal leader called Ask First.
Can you share with us some strategies that you use to communicate cross-culture? For example, indicated by your introduction, you've had about 20 plus diverse cultures that you do business in. Where has it been the most challenging for communications and why?
A very interesting case was in Central Africa somewhere, where jealousy and the spirits were very closely linked. You have more than me, so I get jealous and the spirits tell me to kill you. This was also for a mining client, and they were going to create 1,000 jobs, but there were say 10,000 people living in that area. So now, did that mean that the 1,000 people who got the jobs were going to be killed because of jealousy by the other people? So we ran a program of communication and message management that a job is not the only way to benefit from this mine, and gave examples of the other benefits and so on. And then I worked in this country where everything was completely counterintuitive to Western or European thinking. It's part of Southeast Asia, where you find true indigenous peoples. Some of those people, some of those tribes only became known to the Western world in the 1970s. For the people in that country, signing a contract was only one part of the negotiation. The contract only lasted as long as both parties were happy. Then you can renegotiate, see? So that's completely counterintuitive. Also, a lot of tribes, 800 languages, and a history of tribal warfare. There's a problem with a worker, for example. He maybe has an accident with a company vehicle and kills by accident somebody from another tribe. He then immediately runs away because the other tribe are going to come and kill him. And if they can't find him, they're going to kill his brother. So that was one example, working in a completely different environment, and the value of bringing local people into our engagement teams was indescribable. You could only do it with local people to help you understand. You could also not even, people would say to you, are you going to build a school here? You couldn't say, well, look, we'll put that forward as a suggestion to the company. Because the moment you say that, it means yes to those people.
What are some of the most important elements to consider when communicating cross-culture?
It's the things that you may and may not do. In some cultures, you cannot look somebody in the eye, or you cannot touch them with your left hand or your right hand or whatever. One of the most important things to consider is, firstly, is to do your homework. But secondly, I think, is to put yourself in the shoes of that person. And how is it that that person would want to be communicated with? What is their tradition? For example, I was in the Congo not so long ago. The chief was already sitting down when I got there, and I went and sat on the ground next to him. I don't stand and talk down to him like that. Cross-cultural communication as well is that you absolutely have to communicate simply, simple language, no big technical jargon. And what we find in the field that we work is that in Africa, people are only used to old-style mining and oil and gas with really negative impacts. So to explain modern mining, IFC performance standards, cross-culturally, we have a good mix of verbal, visual, and written materials. Everybody can pick what works best for them. We normally don't explain it verbally ourselves. We get local facilitators and train them to explain to people what is modern mining. So there's a little bits of cross-cultural communication.
Do you have any recommendations for women specifically on how to deal with some cultures, or is there anything else we should be doing?
For women to work in the fields of mining and oil and gas, they need as a minimum the same qualifications as the guys that work in oil and gas, and might mean as a minimum a master's or a doctorate in one of the fields like geology, geochemistry, and we know that there are a lot of women that actually have those qualifications now. And when you interact on a professional basis with people in that field, but you are as qualified, as experienced as they are, gender soon doesn't become an issue. So that's my one small piece of advice. The other thing is that sometimes as a woman, and it is just so, and I'm talking now about professional women, I'm not talking about rural communities where the role of women is very oppressed and they have a very hard time, but professionally, if gender does come into anything, it's no use throwing a tantrum, because that's exactly what people expect. It's just to take the moral high ground and to act professionally and to move on and to show your own worth. People think initially you're just a pretty face, but you can sometimes see the change in their faces when you start adding value in a professional sense. For women in rural communities, poor communities, life is very hard, but there are often role models and champions in those communities, strong women. There are programs by NGOs to build the capacity of young girls in terms of the role of women in society. This is not something that's going to be solved in a year's time, or probably in our lifetime in very traditional societies. But where we go, we make a point of bringing the voice of women in, and if there's community development projects, we make a point of making sure that some of those projects are specifically geared to capacity building for women.
Which leads to what has been the most significant impact you feel you've had in your career to date?
There's two things that I would like to mention, and the one is that by bringing the voice of people into projects and sometimes fighting hard with our clients to say, look, you should not do that because you're going to have these impacts, and being successful in that, making a difference on the ground, that has been very rewarding for me. And the other impact, I hope, is leaving a legacy. I started my own company in 1989, and some of the first staff that joined me in the early 90s are still with me today in senior positions, and they came in either as cleaners or fax operators or secretaries. In fact, the person who's leading our social groups in Africa at the moment came in as my secretary. Actually, she had capability way beyond being a secretary, and so on. So I try to leave a legacy with the people that I work with, not only in my own company, but elsewhere. And in Golder, I am the technical lead for these services. So in the last 2 years, I've gone around all continents and trained in how to do it. And now and again, I get a little email to say, thank you very much, we've learned this. And that is, for me, very important.
If there was one thing you would attribute your success to, something that happened to you, a moment in time, an attitude, what would that be?
A drive to succeed, and probably because of not growing up in a very wealthy family, and you get lots of classic overachievers in parts of the world where they had very little as children, and but had some brains and just went on with a drive to succeed in first in studying, then in business, and so on and so forth. So the fact that you just don't give up, you are going to make a difference. That's my dream. I want to do, and I can't pinpoint my dream all the time, but my dream is that everything is a stepping stone, and every time you step, you're getting better, you're learning more. Even today, if I don't learn, I'm bored. And you're learning more, and you're making more of a difference.
What is the most challenging aspect of your career?
I suppose it is convincing clients of the value of these feely things. Clients that often chose their career in the first place not to work with the people, that now have to stand up in front of people, that all their lives have been able to design a mine or an oil and gas field without any interference, and had done it well, but now you get all the soft stuff coming in. So it's often very challenging to explain to people who are experts in their own field that this genre, this new discipline, is not only going to make a difference, but it's in fact essential in terms of the law. And I don't know if you know about the Equator Principles, all the major banks that have signed it, they will not lend you money unless you can show that you are environmentally and socially responsible, you have the plans in place and so on. So that's often a very challenging thing. It's anxious for some clients to have to open their company and their plans to the public. That's often very challenging.
What would be the biggest obstacle to get to this point in your career?
For me was links back to what I said earlier about getting the qualifications. I started my own business with just a B degree, and at some point I realized that if I want to be respected by people that are 3-4 levels higher qualified than me, then I'd better get a master's. So here I was, already having started my own company, doing a master's degree part-time in 2 years, and I just put my mind to it and I said, I have to do this. And I worked myself to an absolute standstill, but I did it.
Now, has there ever been a project that you've implemented that didn't work out the way you intended? And if there is, what would you do differently now, knowing what you know?
At some point during a recession in South Africa, my company, which had then kind of grown, by now we were probably 20-25 people, suddenly didn't do well, because suddenly all the clients stopped their projects and said, sorry, we're putting this on hold for 6 months, and I had this big machine to feed. I had also, because we were so busy and working so many places on so many projects, I had let go of some key elements in the business that I should have looked after myself. And one of them was signing checks. And I'd given that responsibility to somebody else, and I said, look, I give you this responsibility up to this point. But too much money had flowed out, with me not actually keeping tabs on it. So I would be a little bit more circumspect to grow so fast, should I ever start my own company again, which is highly unlikely. Been there, done that, hard work. And rather work with subcontractors when you need them, than to keep appointing and appointing and appointing, because the economy is so fluid, has been over the last 20 years, that, the crash comes overnight. And if you're not prepared for it, then you're in trouble.
This is what I call my edginess segment, and this refers to something that you've had to do that makes you uncomfortable. You had to push the edge of your comfort zone, but you had to do that in order to achieve the success that you've achieved.
Persuading people in technical disciplines, engineering, geophysics, geohydrology, etc., that they needed the communication aspect of the business. And that is worldwide, or in our clients' offices. That was hard to build a business of which there had been no such business before in South Africa, and probably in Africa. To build a business on public participation, maintain a client base, and to illustrate the value. Mm-hmm. And even now, we often have to do that.
Mm-hmm. If there was one thing you would do differently in your career, what would that be?
I went through menopause in my mid-40s or so, and I didn't know what it was. And I became really cranky and an unpleasant person, and extremely anxious, and really very strict and judged people in my company and so on. And what I would do differently, and my advice to people would be, is if when you go through those years, realize it, go and get help in advance. Know that there is something wrong when you suddenly change personality, and go and get help. When I did eventually go and see a therapist, I thought, oh my goodness, okay, that's the problem. So, just identifying the problem already makes it better, but that had gone on for 2-3 years. So I would get help earlier when I am struggling personally to cope. I've always gotten help from mentors about many different aspects in business and in projects, and so that I didn't know, but they had more knowledge. But one forgets to go and get help for yourself. So that is one thing I will do differently.
That's excellent advice. What does success mean to you?
It's leaving a legacy. I would like to sit on my front porch one day, veranda, I don't know what you say in your language, and move my chair with the sun, and I would like to see this person that I've worked with now in that position, and that one making a difference there, and this one having a nice company. That's what I would like to see.
How would you define leadership?
Leadership is to have the ability almost to, if you can imagine you're a ship on the sea, and there's lots and lots of other little ships, and you all want to go that way, is to be able to help them and pull them or push them that way, but in a way that it builds their capacity, that builds their profile, through influence rather than instruction. Now that sounds very good. One doesn't always reach your own ideals. You do sometimes want to grab somebody by the throat and say, for heaven's sake, go to that conference and do that paper now. But that's what I think is, somewhere somebody said, a leader whispers. And I'm not fully there. I'm still trying to only whisper.
It's hard, isn't it?
It's very hard.
What would be 3 leadership lessons that you would give to somebody who leads a project or an initiative?
That issue of leaving a legacy. Build the capacity of your people. Take giant leaps of faith in people. You see there is potential. Take the leap of faith and do something with them or for them to propel them into another or a higher or a more responsible position. Sometimes you fail and it doesn't matter, because sometimes it works and it works well, and you help your people to fly. That for me is an important thing for leaders. The other thing is to, as I said earlier, to have mentors. I had many mentors over the years. Every time my business grew or took a little bit of a different direction, or when I joined Golder, I had mentors for different things. They know better than you. They've been there before you. They've learned. Go and ask advice. And as I said earlier, also ask advice about yourself and your own head and your heart.
If you did have a daughter that was 10 today, what advice would you give to her?
I would say you can do it. You can grow. You can excel. You can think. Just do it. Just go out and pursue your dream. Sometimes things are not simple. In fact, things are never simple. But you can overcome anything. With enough drive and enough flexibility, you can overcome anything. Just do it. Go out and get your dream.
So what's next for you?
For a long time now, I've been a strategic advisor here, and I do feel a need to work a little bit more on the ground again and build capacity of people through doing that, and I may do that next year. I also absolutely have to manage my work-life balance a little bit. I support, I'm a bird watcher, a birder, and I support it's my own personal little project, a community camp in northern Zimbabwe where there's some very special birds. And I would like a little bit more time to spend on not only my hobby, but on supporting that community to get their camp to be viable.
Now, what are your words of wisdom for African women?
Nothing is ever simple on your path to reach your dream or your goal. Accept that and don't see it as a stumbling block. Nothing is ever simple, so have a plan A, have a plan B, have a plan C, and then still be able to think on your feet.
That's excellent advice. That's excellent advice. Thank you so much for that insight. Some real wonderful insight about a woman who goes to a different country almost every other week to understand the culture of who you are communicating with. Again, my name is Suzanne F Stevens, and I co-produce Wisdom Exchange TV alongside my husband, Michael K. Ginrich. We've been traveling all over Africa, interviewing women leaders. If you know a woman that we should be interviewing, please email us at info@Wisdom Exchange TV. Also, join us at Wisdom Exchange TV Facebook fan page as we do updates there regularly, as well as on the front page of our site where we syndicate expert blogs of women we interview, and you'll see new information there every day. Lastly, I want to leave you with my words of wisdom. And there was a message that was so strong amongst many throughout this interview, but one I want to reiterate because I'm extremely passionate about it, is know who you are dealing with. Understand the communities and the people that you want to work with. The more you understand them, the more they get them involved in the process, the more they will accept the process and ultimately the project. Thank you so much for joining us.